afternoon. But I'll just say I'm very happy to be here and welcome to everybody. Let me share my screen with you all. Let's see. I thought a good place to start. My life is a lot different now than it was 20 years ago. I thought I'd give you a little background to see where I am now and where I was. It's funny, I'm doing a little talk on mediumship, and I wrote it in my book, in the introduction. I wrote a little story. It was back in the summer of 2002, and I was playing golf with a friend of mine, and the golf course was crowded, and we were sitting on the golf cart waiting to tee off at the next hole. And my friend Kenny looked at me and he says, "Bob, I have something I need to tell you." And I said, "What?" And my friend Kenny had lost his wife to cancer a couple of months before. And he said, "I went to a medium." I said, "Yeah." And he said, and she started telling me all this amazing things about Karen. And there's no way she could have possibly known it. And I'm convinced that she was talking to Karen. And I must have been giving him that look that now other people give me. And I managed to just a weak little, okay, Kenny, who knows? He says, "Do you believe me?" And I said, I really don't know what to say, Kenny. If I said the thing that you never should say to somebody, if it makes you feel better. That's the meaning, And I remember afterwards going home and telling my wife, "Oh my God, Kenny is in such unbelievable grief. He's going to this gypsy fortune teller, and she's going to take all his money, and this is horrible." And I felt like I had to intercede somehow to get him on the right track. Fast forward a couple of months later, on the morning of September 1st, 2002, at 3 o'clock in the morning, my wife Fran shot up in bed, just sat up, and she was trembling and she was shaking and she was ashen white. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Well, something horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "What does that mean?" And she said, "I can't tell you, but it's going to be utterly devastating. Something that we're going to dread is going to happen today." And she couldn't give me any details, but I decided to take her seriously, because even though I was this logical left brain thinker that didn't really believe in anything non-physical, there were many times in our lives together where Fran had these moments, whether you call it precognitive moments or visions, and they all came out to be true, exactly the way that she described them. But they were all good things, and logic told me if she was right then, she could be right now. So as a parent, I had 3 children and I watched over them through the day. My oldest one we had the SUV all packed up because I was taking him back to college the next morning. And my middle daughter started her college career, and she was at the university for about a week. And my youngest daughter, Bailey, was 15, and she was working one last day in her part-time job. And I dropped her off and I checked on her during the day. Everything was fine. At the end of the day, I let my guard down. I let it fade from my awareness. Maybe this was, nothing, there's nothing to this. We had 2 cars. My son and my daughter left in one car to go home after we went out to a dinner in a restaurant. And we live in a rural area. There's only one road in and one road out. And Fran and I stopped to pick up a quart of milk. We followed 5 minutes, behind. We came upon an accident, and our worst fears were realized. And my daughter didn't survive her injuries, and my son was airlifted to a hospital in a coma, with brain injuries. As anybody would be, I was in a kind of a state of shock for quite a while. But when it became clear that my son was going to survive his injuries, he came out of the coma, it started to look a lot better. It suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks. I remembered that morning, and I remembered that Fran knew. And I said, "Well, how did she know?" And that started me. I was obsessed with finding out how she knew. So I started traveling across the country, meeting with scientists and researchers, medical doctors that studied consciousness. At the same time, my wife although interested in the science, really didn't need it because she had this inner spiritual knowledge that I didn't possess. And we found ourselves, even though I was investigating these things, I mean, I was just figuring out a way that I was going to survive my daughter's loss. I mean, we'd go to a grief support group that we found, and it was all for bereaved parents. And then every time that either Fran or I brought up the subject of an afterlife, the moderator quickly shut us down. We don't talk about those things here. This is just for, coping, how to cope with your grief. And we thought that was odd because most of the parents there, that's all they wanted to talk about. Is it possible that their child still survived in some form? So we found ourselves, after the meeting was over, standing out in the parking lot, usually in the winter, freezing our asses off, and we would talk for 2 hours with the other parents about the afterlife. One thing led to another, and we formed these discussion groups, afterlife discussion groups, because we thought that there was something that was needed, a safe environment where people could discuss these things. And eventually, we started Forever Family Foundation. We do have a heavy involvement with mediums. We'll be talking about that. Of course, mediumship is one part of the piece, and I know if you follow Victor and Wendy's work over the years, many of you are probably well familiar with not only mediumship, but some of the other disciplines of research that suggest life after death. And I thought we'd go through the mediumship. At the end, we can talk about some of the other evidence, and then we can, if you have anything else that you'd like to discuss or you have any questions, we'll go to that. So when we go to different types of mediumship, I find that a lot of people, at least in the United States, are not aware that there's anything but mental mediumship. I mean, that's predominantly 99.9% of the mediums that we are familiar with practice mental mediumship. It's a telepathic communication. They pick up information in a variety of different ways, and we can get into some of those. But there's also, trance mediumships. You don't see that as much today, where a discarnate entity can take over the body of the physical medium, and very often speak through the medium's vocal cords, and the medium takes on the personality and the gestures of the person in spirit. And of course, there's physical mediumship. At one time in the Victorian era, very prevalent, that the physical mediums were all over the place. I mean, seances were the centers of entertainment for people. Physical mediums were studied by the Society for Psychical Research in the United States and also in Britain. Nobel Prize winners, medical doctors, academics, judges, all studied physical mediums. They found a lot of fraud. They also found incredible mediums, and they were convinced that they can indeed do what they claim. One question that we get a lot, are all mediums the same? And, we tend to think of that, an attorney is an attorney, a doctor is a doctor, once they reach that level, everything's the same. But we know that mediums are not all the same. They vary in their abilities. Their proficiency levels range from anywhere from marginal to unbelievable. I'll say it now to get it out of the way, but based upon my 20 years of observation and having witnessed probably 1,000 medium readings and conducting a medium certification program, which I'll mention later, my opinion is that 85 to 90% of all the mediums that are practicing today cannot do what they claim. I'm not saying that they're all fraudulent, only a very small percentage of them are, but some of them have some intuitive ability, as do we all, and they go out and hang up a shingle, and they really should not be sitting with the bereaved and charging a lot of money, and we can get into some of that. Mediums differ in the way that they receive information. Some mediums, as you probably well know, they can see spirit, or they can hear spirit, or they can smell spirit. Sometimes I know of some mediums that get information before the reading. Spirit contacts them before the reading is even done. So it varies greatly in the way that they receive and the way that they communicate information. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Um, you know, one of the reasons I wrote the book is that, think about it. In what profession, especially those dealing with the bereaved, those in grief, are there no regulatory bodies? There are none for mediumship. I mean, in everything else that you do, I mean, even you're getting a cosmetology license, or obviously in any of the professions. I mean, there are licensing boards, there are background checks, there are proficiency evaluations, there are ethical standards, and practitioners have to abide by these. It's continuing education. Mediumship has none of these, and which means that I can go out, call myself a medium tomorrow, hang up a shingle, charge $500 for a reading, and I'm off to the races. It's an issue, and we're seeing now that there are more and more and more and more practitioners, more than there ever been, and that has a lot to do with the media and the TV shows and everything else. One thing that people use the term interchangeably, psychics and mediums. A lot of people say they went for a medium reading, and then they'll tell their friend, I went to a psychic today. Now, you probably heard it a million times. It's a trite saying now, all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics are mediums. And I think that for the most part, that's true. There's a difference in the information. There are some people, I mean, the underlying mechanism is the same. They both involve, communication mind to mind. So with two living people, one mind is traveling out, separate from the brain and picking up information. And with mediums, it's the same process, except that one of the parties, the person in spirit, happens not to have a physical body, but they still have a mind. And when I say mind, you could use the term consciousness or soul or energy, but that's what continues on. So there are people that are incredible psychics and can give you all types of information, but they cannot communicate, with the dead. So it seems to be, I hate to call it a skill set, but it is a separate area where to be able to communicate with the discarnate entity. Incidentally, I mean, I won't get into it now, but I've participated in some informal research where I've was working with some incredibly evidential mediums. And when we scored them on psychic exercises, they were just at chance. They were no better than the general public. So I don't know that it's necessarily true that because somebody's a terrific medium, that they get evidential psychic information to a high degree. Something that we should mention, so many people have told us over the years that they're meant to be a medium. And sometimes that's triggered by a loss. They've had a personal loss, and they're looking for meaning and purpose in their lives, and they think they're on the track, and this is what they should become. Bear in mind, as I've mentioned, we all have intuitive ability. In many cases, it's been atrophied out of us over the years. The scientific revolution did a lot to put us on that course. But just because there's nothing wrong with being a personal communicator, you can communicate on your own without using the services of a medium. But mediumship is very serious business. It comes with a tremendous responsibility, and people should be cautioned. Think hard about whether this is your calling. If it is, go for it. But just because you saw a medium on TV, I mean, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily meant to do this work. I've seen, which drives me a little nuts, sometimes I'll ask why somebody wants to be a medium, and they'll say, well, they went to a medium, and the medium told them that they have ability and that they should develop their abilities. And I don't mean to be cynical, but very often that person winds up taking courses with the medium that told them that, and starts paying them a lot of money. So I'm not saying that's a problem in all cases, but sometimes it is. there's this feeling that if I'm sitting in front of a medium physically, that the information is going to be stronger than if I'm doing it on the phone, and and so forth. Um, well, we think about it. What are mediums doing? They're communicating with somebody that's in a different dimension. If they're in a different dimension, what difference does physical distance make? Whether it's 3 feet or 3,000 miles, it's meaningless. Information is information that's going to get communicated. So you don't have to be, the evidence is going to be equally strong if you're sitting directly in front of the medium, or if you're doing it on Zoom or the phone. Most of the researchers that have done mediumship research in the past prefer to conduct their sessions by the phone, because it eliminates the possibility of cold reading clues that take place. And we can talk about that a little bit as well in the future. There's when we talk about fraud in mediumship, we're in a crazy time right now, especially in the pandemic, because mediums have stopped doing readings physically, and they're all doing it via Zoom. One of the mediums that's certified by our foundation told me last week that he caught another medium. She was doing a reading on Zoom, and of course, when you register on Zoom, you give the name, so the medium has your name. And he saw the medium had on one side of her screen, the Zoom open with the image of the sitter, and on the other side of the screen, the medium had the sitter's Facebook page open, and then started giving a reading, spitting back all of the information that appeared on Facebook. And of course, the sitter was amazed at all the information they were getting. But this is a real problem. When scientists were studying mediums 100 years ago, there was no social media. You couldn't do stuff like that. Now, with one little click, you could find out, so much information. It's unbelievable. So all evidential mediums don't need to resort to that. But the frauds will, they have done it, they will continue to do it. So I would caution people to be careful that way. So when we talk about mediumship, there's information and then there's information. If I'm, sometimes a medium will, during the course of a reading, they'll give a piece of information that the sitter identifies as being correct. And then they'll reword that in a different way and then say it again 4 or 5 different times to give the illusion that they're getting, more hits, than not. Sometimes they will, especially when they're looking at you, you could size up the sitter. If you're the medium and you're giving me a reading right now, you could see me, you can pretty much guess in the pretty close range of how old I am. You could probably guess from the way I'm speaking, especially if you're in the United States that are from New York. You might, by my name, assess what my ethnicity is. And then, you could look at, everybody has these little involuntary movements, and some mediums, the frauds, are very adept at reading subtle and unconscious body movements, everything from little nods to looking at your eye pupils and so forth. So, I would, it's not something that, again, any reputable medium will do, but the frauds will resort to that. There's one, the hour process is very involved, but one of the questions on an extensive application is, I say to the medium, what do you think is more important? A message to the sitter or evidence? And I would expect them to say, well, my job is to provide the evidence, first. But a lot of mediums will answer, no, if I can provide a message of love from their loved one, my job is done, and that's what I should do. I don't particularly care for that, because if you're telling me that you have my loved one, you're telling me I have my mom in spirit, and my mom wants to tell me that she loves me, of course that's true. How many, what percentage of moms don't love their children, but if you are giving me a reading and you're bringing through my mom and you're giving me 7, 8, 9 pieces of very specific evidence, then when you give me the message, I can accept it. Maybe that's just me but I think that a medium has an obligation to first provide the evidence that they're talking to the particular spirit, and then bring through the messages. When we evaluate, evidence, it's really difficult, to parse between psychic information and mediumistic information, because as we discussed, the same underlying mechanism is there. But let's say that the medium is giving me a reading now, and the medium says nothing else but says, well, I'm seeing your bedroom, and I see that you just painted your bedroom blue. And let's say I did just paint my bedroom blue. That's a strong piece of psychic information. That's like, wow, how did the medium pick up on that? But it does nothing to show that we survive our physical deaths. It has nothing to do with the mediumistic process. So, again, if the medium was bringing through my deceased daughter and was giving me statement after statement of evidence, and then said, hey, your daughter's telling me that she likes that you just painted your bedroom blue. Now we look at that differently. That's a strong piece of evidence. The foundation has already been set where I know that I'm communicating with my daughter. So that's what it's not always easy to differentiate psychic from mediumistic, but we do the best, that we can. So I mentioned certifying mediums. So back in 2005, after meeting with several of the leading medium researchers in the field, I took input from them, and then we designed our own certification process that takes place under controlled conditions. And it's an extensive kind of a process. It starts with questionnaires and applications that are reviewed by committee, and then an interview that takes place, and then eventually mediums are invited to participate in an actual session. By the way, out of every 10 mediums that we invite to complete an application, maybe 1 or 2 actually send them back, because when they see a 10-page application and then it's not a matter of writing a check and sending it in and getting a certificate, they kind of back off. So when they do, complete, the application, we know that they're at least serious. And the sessions I won't get into in depth, but a medium will do 5 different readings for 5 different sitters that we train. I train them personally in scoring the evidence, and we have practice sessions and so forth. And then we have 5 different statistical methods of looking at the data, and they have to meet the minimum guidelines in each of the 5 categories. And if they do, that they're granted certification. We understand, we allow mediums to come back again because mediums are not used to being put in that position. I mean, I'd be nervous, if I was a medium. It's kind of a clinical, even though it's not a scientific experiment, it's still a kind of a clinical atmosphere, and it's run, it's all timed. So it can be, it can throw their game off, so to speak, and we recognize that. Mediums, they should never identify themselves as therapists or grief therapists or mental health professionals, unless they also happen to have a training and a degree in that. Having said that, my personal belief is that the information that mediums provide can be the most effective form of grief therapy that there is. I mean, what could possibly give you more hope and comfort than believing that your loved one, still exists, and not only still exists, but exists with their memories and personality intact. I think that mediums should be required to take some basic training in grief. It's one thing to be able to communicate the information. It's another thing to frame it in certain ways as not to possibly, cause some distress in the sitter. Mediums, we've seen it, now for 17, 18 years. Mediumship readings can be transformative. There are many clinical studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals that show just that. Those who believe in life after death do better in their grief than those who don't. And you can certainly understand why. I think that mediums should always be aware of the fragile state of the sitters. Sometimes I've been horrified at the way that the information is communicated. I mean, an ethical medium, even if they sense something dire in somebody's health, was not going to just blurt it out that way. You have to frame it in certain ways. You have to recognize the condition that the person is in. People laugh, but to this day, working with mediums all these years, when we have a foundation event or a demonstration or something and there's a medium involved, I don't stay in the room. And people really, why not? Because I get anxiety, because I know, because I was one of them, what the fragile state that some of the people that are sitting in that room are, such a desperate state, and they so desperately want to get a reading, and it's not going to happen for most of them, especially in a group setting. And I know, because I've evaluated these mediums, that they're excellent and they're among the very best practitioners. But the mediumship process is not a slam dunk. It doesn't always work. I mean, let's face it, in a typical reading, in a one-on-one reading, you have the person in spirit, you have the medium, and you have the sitter, and it has to be a resonance among the three. And if one thing is out of whack, the information is not going to flow. So I think that for the most part, mediums are very in tune, with people that are in grief, and many of them, are wonderful. And I don't know if people have seen the Netflix Surviving Death series, but I think that like one of our grief retreats was featured in there, and they got to witness, the people that came in on Friday got some powerful medium readings, as well as working with grief professionals and so forth. And they left, with smiles and hope and comfort again. So I don't want to discount the enormous value that mediums have with the bereaved. Can one become addicted to mediums? Doesn't happen often, but I've seen it. I mean, I've seen people exhibit addiction-like symptoms. They become agitated if it's been a while, since they had a reading, or they crave, having another reading, and they'll go, so frequently. I mean, most people go to some people go to a medium once, some people go a couple of times, some people go a couple of times a year. But if you're going to a medium every month, you might want to back off a little bit, because one, you're setting yourself up for disappointment, and two, you're inhibiting your own growth in terms of being able to communicate on a personal level. Sometimes people ask, should I go to the same medium more than once? There's no right or wrong answer to this. I could see it both ways. I mean, a lot of mediums will say, well, it really doesn't matter because I don't remember the information, from a reading. But they do often. I've seen it countless number of times, especially if there's a short interval between readings. So they may be giving you the same information, but a lot of it is the same as what they communicated the last time. So I know for me, I'd rather get, different information. And if my loved one came through one medium, would be great. I think I would be even more convinced if I had independent verification, if more than one medium was able to bring, my loved one through. Having said that, I understand why people go to the same medium. Sometimes they get an unbelievable reading. They feel that their loved one has some sort of a connection to the medium, which they very well may be. So they have a stronger chance of getting further communication. So there's not, any right or wrong answer to it, but I would certainly at least try getting a reading from a different medium. what do you do? How do you be a good sitter? Look, I've witnessed readings where the sitter is sitting in front of the medium, and the sitter is wearing a necklace, with a photo of their loved one, facing the medium. We don't want to give, the medium's job is to provide you with the evidence and the information. You don't want to give the information to the medium. I mean, when setting up a reading, you should only give the bare basics. I'll tell you a quick story. In all the years since we've been working with mediums now, 18 years, my wife and I had never received a reading from one of the mediums certified by the foundation. We knew they were great mediums, but I knew that I couldn't trust the information because too many of them knew some stuff about me. So I didn't want to set myself up for, questioning it. And after my wife Fran passed in September, Leslie Kane, who wrote the book Surviving Death, contacted me, and she asked me if I was interested in getting a medium reading. And when Leslie was writing the book, we were kind of collaborating a bit, and I was giving her some people that I thought she should contact. And she wound up, one of the mediums that she contacted was unknown to me, a medium in Ireland who was also featured in the documentary. And I knew she was a great medium because Leslie she transcribed her readings with this medium and brought it to me so I could score the readings to measure the accuracy. And I was amazed when I did the scoring, because she was like 96, 97% accurate. So when Leslie asked me if I wanted to get a reading, I said, okay. So on one condition, the only name I would give was Bob, it's a pretty common name, no last name. And I said I wouldn't pay for the reading in advance. Instead, Leslie paid for the reading using her PayPal account, so they couldn't identify me. And it turns out I had an extraordinary reading, extremely evidential. I took great comfort from it, but that's the extreme. I'm not saying that everybody has to go through those extremes, but limit the information that you provide to them beforehand. And my advice is that if the medium should never be asking you who you want to speak to. They should just bring through whoever is coming through, and you accept it or don't accept it. But I think that's wrong to tell them who you want to hear from. During the reading, you want to give them yes or no type answers. Yes, I understand. No, I don't understand. Maybe, I'm not sure. Can you give me more? Things like that. I've seen, and I understand it, I've seen people that get so excited when a piece of communication is coming from their loved one that they start blurting out tremendous amounts of information, which is not fair to the medium. I mean, you got to give the medium a chance to give you some of that information. So on the other hand, you can't sit there like a lump and not let the medium know if things are right or wrong, because they need to know whether to go back to spirit or, I've seen, unfortunately, a case, and even in our certification sessions, the medium started bringing through the sitter's deceased mom. The only problem was that her mom was not deceased, and she told the medium that it's not, her mom is not deceased, and the medium didn't hear it, and then they spent the whole time during that session giving information on, from mom and spirit when mom wasn't. So, people have to listen to each other and understand the answers. And so I had one other situation threw me for a loop. Back in the day, we used to gather all the sitters in one physical location. Now we do it all, with meeting software like Zoom. But we had different workstations set up throughout the premises with different sitters. And I was walking by just observing. I try not to stay in the room, but I have to just make sure everything's okay. And I saw this medium, because it was taking place on Skype. And I knew some information about this sitter, and I heard the medium mention the sitter's husband's first name and the way her husband died, and all sorts of evidential information. And the sitter was just sitting there going, nope, nope, nope. And I wanted to, I couldn't say anything. It was in the middle of the reading. And afterwards I said, Ethel, I don't get it. The medium was giving you a tremendous amount of information and you wrote everything wrong. Turned out Ethel was hard of hearing. She couldn't hear a darn thing that the medium was saying. So that taught me another question to ask the citizen or training him, how's your hearing? Because it works. You never know what to look out for that could mess things up. Question is, a lot of people think, well, mediums, they communicate with the dead on a regular basis. Surely, they don't grieve like I'm grieving. And, they do. I mean, mediums are human. I mean, they grieve just like the rest of us. I mean, sometimes I've gotten uncomfortable in watching certain demonstrations where the medium is mourning their own loss, and they start talking about that loss, because then I think the people sitting in the audience might say, oh my God, if this person communicates with the dead and they're still feeling that heavy grief, what hope do I have? But mediums are human just like the rest of us. They certainly have a right to grieve alongside of us. Something that I've noticed, and some researchers have as well, is that I never put two and two together, but then I started one day asking the mediums certified by our foundation and others as well, if they suffer from any physical ailments. And I started to find out that a high percentage of mediums did. And I can understand that, because mediums are highly empathic. And, if you sat with a medium, sometimes they'll tell you the cause of death of your loved one. And they feel it. A lot of them describe actually feeling the physical, the heart pressure or pain from cancer and so forth. That must take a toll. I also found that trauma, I was amazed one time. I went through 20 mediums and 17 of them told me about childhood trauma that they had, either physical or mental trauma, which would lead one, of course, this is not a scientific experiment, but it leads one to believe that trauma very often may very well be a trigger for intuitive abilities. TV shows, a lot of people have talked about that, are they real? Look, TV is TV. And when Netflix was filming us for the documentary, they had 70 hours of film with us, 70, between, personally and through the foundation. That got edited down to 30 minutes of content. That's how TV and movies and production works. These TV shows where the medium just happens to walk into the pizza parlor and there are cameras there, and they start doing readings. I mean, they're filming in each episode, they're filming 8 to 10 hours that get whittled down to 22 hours of content. Do you think that they're going to show the hits or they're going to show the misses? I mean, this is about ratings. Of course, they're going to show all the hits. So it's not an accurate portrayal of mediumship. And it's not fair to the other very credible evidential mediums, because one time somebody sent me an email and said that they were unhappy with the reading that they had with a certified medium. And I probed more. And I said, well, what makes you say that? And they said, well, the medium got something wrong. And I said, well, you do realize it was an hour reading and that the best mediums in the world are like 90% accurate. They're going to get a couple of things wrong. And the answer was, well, so-and-so on TV never does. So that puts the medium in an impossible situation. TV gives the perception that mediums are infallible. And of course, we know they're not. The mediums interpret the information they receive. Yeah, it's really difficult. They're getting this information in a variety of different ways, and they have to put that into human language. What a job that is for the medium. I mean, just think about it. I mean, the medium is bringing through a discarnate, and let's say the discarnate wants to get their name across communicated to the medium. So let's say their name is George. Well, I can be inventive and I could try to implant a photo of George Washington into the medium and hope that he or she would pick up on it. But what if I have an obscure name? You know, the point is, a lot of different mediums may get the same information, but how they translate it and how they communicate it is different. People commute. I've talked to mediums and they describe getting information like on a big screen in front of them, and they know by the placement of the information on the screen how that represents, you know, mother or father or child and so forth. There are all different ways that medium get it. I think where the medium gets into trouble, many years ago, I think a medium once said when he was training other mediums, you know, just give it like you get it. You know, where they get into trouble is they get the information, which is terrific, but instead of just saying what they're getting, they start using their own frame of reference to interpret it, you know, and that's where they go off stray. Instead of just saying what they got and what the sitter, that'll be meaningful to the sitter, believe me, if you just say, you know, say what it is. So I think that's my advice that I would give to mediums as they interpret it. We touched briefly on this, but group sessions versus individual readings. You have a much better chance, obviously, of getting a reading in an individual session. In group sessions, there's information coming through as spirits are lining up, you know, to try to get through to the medium. You know, in one of our retreats, one of the mediums that we certified, Joe Shield, did an exercise. He said to everybody sitting there, about 50 people in the room, and he said, I want everybody in the room to turn to your left and start a conversation with the person next to you. And everybody did that. And, you know, within like 10, 15 seconds, the noise in the room was deafening, the drone of the conversation. And then he told everybody to stop, and he just said, welcome to my world. You know, so in a group session, you can imagine all the spirit lining up, and they have to hone in and focus on one, which is why they can't always do that. Sometimes they're talking to somebody and it's really meant for somebody, you know, next to them. Maybe the person in spirit, they retain the same personality and then they're somewhat shy. Maybe the information coming through is sensitive in nature and they don't want to put their loved one through that. So you're not always going to get a reading, you know, and that's another subject I have a strong opinion about. I say unfortunately, they wouldn't say so, but a lot of the mediums that we certified over the years have become very famous. And when they become famous, you know, what happens? They start charging sometimes a ridiculous amount of money. Their waiting list is 2, 3, 4 years, you know, long, and it kind of defeats the purpose of having a resource for the bereaved. But the thing that really gets me is that they start playing these huge arenas, you know, sometimes 5,000, 10,000 people, you know, so they charge, there's 5,000 people coming to see them, each paying whatever, $100 a pop. And then you have 5,000 people driving there in their cars thinking the love bond that they had with their person in spirit was so strong that somehow their loved one is going to find a way to get through. And in reality, you know, it's an hour, in the hour and a half or 2 hours, the medium will do maybe 5 or 6 readings. So you have 4,995 people driving home disappointed. You know, so if they're going to this because they want to see a celebrity, so to speak, fine, but understand what you're going to. If you really desire a reading, I would suggest an individual reading, you know, versus a group. Can spirit turn off spirit communication? You know, a lot of people ask that. I mean, how do mediums navigate their personal lives? You know, I mean, the mediums most of them, almost all of them will say that they have a way of either asking their guides or just shutting down to spirit communication. Of course, I've also been with mediums in social settings where we're having a drink and then all of a sudden things start, you know, flowing through and you see the energy build. So I don't know that it's totally true. I know that right now we've been consulting on the advisory board of a study that's going on with Yale Medical School. And they're studying people that are intuitive, people that hear voices, people, you know, mediums and personal communicators, because they're trying to learn how mediums, if a medium or an intuitive can kind of turn off the voices, They want to use that information to treat people that are now being treated for mental illness, that hear voices and they have legitimate conditions, and that they think that might be really interesting as another treatment mode. Are mediums spiritual, and do they do spiritual work? Yes and no. If you're defining, mediums today, most of them will call themselves either psychic mediums or spiritual mediums. If we call them spiritual because they're communicating with the spirit realm, well then, yeah, they're all spiritual. Other than that, they're people. There's good and there's bad. I have met mediums over the years that enlightened, enormously spiritual, compassionate, loving people. I've also met mediums that are lousy human beings. I wouldn't want them to be my friend. And yet they still are able to communicate with spirit at a high level. How does that happen? I'm of the opinion that the mediumship ability really has nothing to do with spirituality. It's an ability or a gift that they have. However, I've seen cases over the years that mediums that have gotten really, really big, and their egos have gotten really, really large, and it seems that their readings have gotten less evidential. So maybe spirit pulls back if they think that you're not doing it for the right reasons. Do they have different styles in the way they work? Yeah, I've seen mediums that they sound like comedians. I've seen mediums, their style that they communicate information usually matches their personality. So mediums that are very reserved or somewhat shy might deliver information in a deliberate manner. Others that are frenetic and type A personalities go a mile a minute. I've seen, mediums all over the map. So it just depends on, who you're seeing. Because you see one medium deliver it in one way, the next medium, chances are they're going to deliver the information in a totally different fashion. Some of the other research, that supports survival of consciousness, mediumship is important, but it's only one piece of the puzzle. Many of you, I may be preaching to the choir because you know about most of these things, but I think near-death experiences are extremely compelling forms of evidence that we survive death, mainly because experiencers meet every definition that medical science has for physical death. There are no brain waves, there's no respiration, there's no heartbeat, there are no reflexes. You are physically dead, and yet they are resuscitated and report these clear and lucid experiences. And, that's the last thing that you would expect from somebody that was dead. The argument that skeptics may use is that it's due to oxygen deprivation, anoxia, but those familiar with anoxia, it's anything but clear and lucid. People are thrashing about, they're hallucinating, everything's fragmented. It's anything but a insightful and calm experience. And as you may know, there are many, many different things. Scientists have identified 10 to 12 commonalities among the near-death experiencers. Some, not every near-death experiencer has them all. Some may have one, some maybe have 5. But there are things like you've heard of, going through a dark tunnel, seeing light, meeting with deceased loved ones, being above their body and being able to view, what's going on from a different vantage point, coming back with intuitive abilities, and being imbued with knowledge from the other side. The most important thing, though, is a high percentage of experiencers come back and they change the way in which they live their lives, which tells you something right there, because they've seen the other side. End of life experiences. I think deathbed visions are enormously evidential. I've experienced it several times, unfortunately, in my own life. People in that window, either just before they die or in the 2 weeks before death, start having conversations with deceased loved ones who have gone before them. and who are apparently there to help them cross to the other side. I think that my belief is that every one of us, even though we may not be able to communicate it because of a physical or mental incapacity, I think we all have these visions, these escorts to the other side. And so the spiritual implications of this, are great. I'll just tell you a quick one. When my mother was dying, we had her in a recliner, and we had the family was sitting in a semicircle in front of her, and directly in front of my mom was an empty chair. And all of a sudden, my mother started reaching out, extending her arms, and I knew what was coming, but nobody else in the room did except for Fran. And she started talking to her mom, and her mom who had died, 50 years prior. And she was, you saw a smile on her face, and she got animated, and the light came to her again. And she's having a conversation, and all of a sudden my father walks out of the other room, and he sees the empty chair. So he walks over and he sits down in the empty chair. And my mother, as sick as she was, starts freaking out, get up, get up, get up. My father had no idea that he sat on his mother-in-law, and my father got up and whoa, he didn't know what happened. But, of course, I was open to all these things. I mean, I knew what to expect. Talk to people, and I'm sure many of you have, who work in hospice, medical doctors who are administrators of hospice. That's how they know when somebody's going to pass, when they start having these visions. So it's a very common thing. Not too many people talk about it. It's like, for some reason, this dirty little secret, because people are afraid of telling others because they don't want to be judged or labeled, or somebody tell them they're crazy. Reincarnation. Many of you may be familiar with the work of Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia. For 40 years and 5,000 cases, documented past life memories that children have. The researchers actually become like detectives. They interview the child with all these memories. They pull autopsy reports, medical records, police reports. If they can identify where the child lived before, they go and visit the other family. Some of those more compelling cases were also featured on that Netflix documentary, but the work is now being continued by Dr. Jim Tucker at the same university. So that's something, that's another strong piece of the puzzle. After-death communications are a broad term. Signs, synchronicities, dream visitations are so prevalent. The theory being that when we're in this REM stage of sleep and our loved ones see this channel of chatter, that our chatter minds or monkey minds are put aside, and they have a clear conduit to get through. Dream visitations differ from so-called regular dreams. They're tactile. You can hug your loved one, you could smell your loved one, you could tell them you love them, you can have a conversation. They can be life-changing, when people have them. Electronic voice phenomena. You can do it very simply. Get any electronic digital recording device or your phone, set an intention to a loved one in spirit for them to come through, turn on the recorder for 20 seconds, 25 seconds, turn it off, play it back. Sometimes, rarely, but sometimes you'll hear a voice. We have a medium that's been certified by our foundation, and unrelated to mediumship, she has been experimenting with EVP for many years. And she was friendly with my wife, Fran. And after Fran passed, she decided to each week make a series of 7 or 8 different questions. And she would pose the questions to Fran in spirit and then turn on the recorder. One day it happened to be my birthday. And one of the questions was, Fran, do you have a message for Bob? The medium, sends me the audio recordings, and then I hear the response, happy birthday. That meant a lot to me. In another one, she said to Fran, can you tell me the name of the organization that you founded? And you hear faintly but clearly, Forever Family Foundation. So the thing that's intriguing about EVP is that unlike many of these other things that we're talking about, this physical evidence, we have it on recordings, so it's not something that we could say that, we heard from a third party. I mean, we have, of course, you can make the argument that our brains, which is true, are hardwired to make sense out of random noise and kind of gibberish. But what I used to do is take an EVP and play it in a crowd of 10 or 15 people. And I would ask everybody to write down what they think that they heard. And if 15 out of 15 people hear the same thing, it's hard to make the argument that everybody's brain is working the same way and interpreting it, gibberish. So I think we can discount that. And lastly, we want to talk about where interest. People usually say to us, well, why are you interested in telepathy? Why are you interested in EVP? Why are you interested in remote viewing? What does it have to do with the afterlife? Well, it has everything to do with the afterlife, because it shows that our mind, our consciousness can act independently of the physical brain. And if you can show that, then it becomes logical to assume that life can continue when the physical brain is no more. So things like, telepathy, remote viewing. I had read, 10 or 15 books on remote viewing going back over the last 50 or 60, 70 years. And so I decided to do an experiment on my own. And we sent out an announcement that every night between a 15-minute interval, 9 p.m. to 9:15 p.m., Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, I was going to draw a picture. And I asked anybody who thought that they wanted to join in and participate, whether they have any intuitive ability or not, tune in at 9 o'clock and just draw the first image that comes into your mind. And at the end of the series, mail them back to me, and then I'll compare them to what I drew. And I purposely wouldn't think of what I was going to draw until, a couple of seconds before 9 p.m. because I was trying to eliminate the possibility that people were reading my mind. So, and I'm a horrible artist, but when I say draw a picture, there's millions of possibilities. So I did the best I could, and I drew some, very detailed drawings. And on the last day, I said I was kind of gonna change it up a bit. Instead of drawing a picture, I decided to draw a geometric shape. I drew a dot, and then I drew concentric circles surrounding the dot. And at the end of the experiment, people started sending in their envelopes, and I was looking at them, and quite frankly, I was disappointed. I really didn't see anything, it would be a stretch which I wasn't going to do, to make something fit. And the very last envelope that came in was from a woman in Bend, Oregon. I'll never forget, because this is about 16 years ago. And 3 out of the 5 photos, she got exact depictions of what I drew, including the concentric circles. The interesting thing was I drew those circles on Friday, and she drew them on Thursday, which of course then raised another possibility of who was remote viewing who. The images that she got wrong, as I've read in the research, she had all of the components in different pieces, but just didn't put it together. So that was meaningful to me, because it showed me my physical brain at the time was in New York, in my skull. Her brain was in Oregon, 3,000 miles away, in her skull. If the materialist explanation is true, how do we explain that? How can if we are our brains, how could our minds extend beyond? So that's why it's important, I think, to study all these things. And I'm sorry for rushing through all that, but if anybody has any questions, or want to talk about personal experiences, want to share anything, I'm all ears.